And I'm going to welcome you all to this special lunchtime session, our first lunchtime session of Men's Health Connected 2021, where we're going to be talking about content creators and community builders, a subject that we haven't got into before in this kind of dedicated way, and looking at some of the work that's being done by some of our speakers and elsewhere in creating content. As a content creator myself, I am the content manager and producer of all sorts of things for the Australian Men's Health Forum. And I was just saying before, I previously worked in the high-powered sports industry, putting out content for a Grand Slam tournament, the Australian Open, which had an entirely different focus, and we had content everywhere: video, social media, written, editorial. And had started to get into the business of podcasting, which has been a huge explosion. And I love podcasts. In particular, I've just heard that Apple are going to be offering a subscription-based podcast. So content creators will have an opportunity to actually get money through subscriptions rather than their own advertising or doing it for nothing. So I'm very interested to know how our speakers have built awareness about the particular topics that they have chosen, which is around men's health, and how some of the challenges that they've faced in doing what they're doing. So we will be looking at what sort of content you're producing, what sort of audience and why you've chosen the platforms that you've chosen. This, as I said before, there's just so many choices and choices within choices. Instagram, you can have Instagram stories, you can have Reels, you can have TikTok linking into Reels, you can have IGTV. You almost need to have done a thesis to keep up with this stuff, and you can get very lost in keeping up with what you should be doing. So where have you chosen to reach your audiences, and any tips that you can give our listeners today? So without further ado, our first speaker is Sean Coffin from the Modern Bloke, who released a podcast this year, I believe. Sean founded the Modern Bloke to build a community that helps men with self-development, and shares his own lived experience in this area and lessons that he's learnt. He is the perfect example of someone who is working really hard to build men's health in a positive and relatable way. So, Sean, I'm going to also remind anybody listening, if they've got a question, to pop it in the chat stream, and we'll get to that as we go along, and to just raise your hand if you've got something to say. I haven't muted anybody. Oh, I will unmute. You're okay, Sean. You're not on mute. So please take it away. Tell us more about your podcast and what led you to go down this path.
Yeah, thank you. And hey, guys, and seeing some of you guys on the screen that I've met before is both nice and intimidating. So let's see how we go with that. Thank you for the introduction. As you said, my name's Sean Coffin, and the page or kind of like organization that I run is the Modern Bloke. I guess for content creation and community building, I spent a lot of time on what to call my name as the Modern Bloke. It isn't just something that happened. It was a lot of thinking around it in terms of both my target market, which is everyday blokes, your 25 to 45-year-old men that fit in the middle of that demographic, and the term modern being that I want to communicate to people that this is an evolution of men's health, men's mindset, what it means to be a man, masculinity in society, and having those discussions. So just from the start, it's important to me, if you're going to do content creation and build communities and get yourself out there, that just simply that name is powerful because of it's what people resonate with from the start, and it just gives an idea of what you're going to start projecting. The type of content that I do, I want to be in kind of the empowerment mindset kind of area where there's amazing people on this call that do amazing things. My kind of where I want to support everyone is to have those discussions, the mindsets and the thinking where guys go from that's not what guys do, because they've brought up on traditional values and kind of like the old school bloke, to the modern bloke being a brand of, okay, that's what guys do. We go to psychologists, we go to catch-ups, we go to self-development programs, and really have that brand, what I call the brand of guys for that. And I talk around blokes culture and mental health in most of my Instagram posts and podcasts. I guess when you were talking, Kim, about why I chose Instagram and podcasting, is Instagram, I found that with guys, if you talk too direct at them, then they'll often tune out. Whereas if you leave them the space for them to read and think and open up without being too forceful, that they resonate and they can read it in their own time. And I found Instagram being the perfect platform for that. And then, as you said, you can do Instagram stories if I want to be more direct on a specific point. And then, Instagram TV. And then Instagram stories is just for those little nuggets of thinking that you've got. In terms of, I guess, empowerment, quite early on and an example of where it works, quite early on with a guy that had engaged a little bit, and I probably didn't realize that he was in the background. And the idea being is to put content out and let people in the background maybe follow it. There was a guy that messaged me, and he was 38 years old, big bushy beard, looked like a lumberjack. And he said that he'd been following my content for a while and loved that he could go and read back on it, and that it was just, how he had thought but been articulated into words. But it gave him confidence to be himself rather than what he thought a stereotypical either guy is or his other demographic. And with that, he came out at 38 years old to his parents as being gay. He never thought that he would, because he didn't consider himself the brand of kind of gay that he sees out there, and didn't really know if he was liking the blokey stuff, if he'd be accepted. But just from reading both the mindset of the modern bloke and the confidence to be yourself, that was a great just example of how it worked, even if we don't see these people in the background.
So can you tell us about, with your podcast in particular, how did you go about, did you know anything about, because there's a lot of complexities and some technical, whether it's getting the right cover, whether it's, what the equipment, how did you go about setting it up and getting it out there?
With all avenues, I knew absolutely zero, and it was very daunting. And I think, I had to remind myself and almost say, what would I say to myself if I was in the position of giving advice? And it was just do it, just have a crack. But I'll say, and I know Omar and Chris specifically from here, the biggest learning I found to getting out podcasting or doing content or even doing events, ask the community. It can be very hard as guys to ask for help, but learning, I just asked other people what they had done in podcasts, and they gave me advice. And then the second hard part was taking the plunge to putting it online. I had done recordings, I'd done everything else like that. But it was just to get ahead and do it, put the content out there, and showcase. In terms of specifics on how to do podcasting, YouTube, just a lot of YouTube videos, and realize that you're probably, wherever you're at, and especially in groups where you've got a specific, like say dad's in the stress type thing with the parents beyond breakup, where that's their specialty. You're not supposed to know how to podcast. So just open your mind that this is a kid learning something new, and go in with it with that growth mindset, that open mindset, and that knowing that it's okay to be confused at the start, but just keep trying to understand it. And probably, the biggest piece of advice is, just start, fumble your way forward, start slowly, gain confidence, have a plan, understand, your communication and your consistency, that you're going to be doing what you're communication to your target demographic, like to whoever's listening to, whether it be dads, whether it be boys, whether it be parents, and yeah, just get started.
And just one final question from me. In terms of scheduling, have you mapped out your speakers, or is it a case of week to week? Who am I going to speak to? What sort of regularity you're going to publish your podcasts?
No, great question. Yep. And that's where constant and consistent is probably in building a community, especially online. Consistency, constant type of thing. So make sure you're always doing. So I end up doing a interview every fortnight, but then the alternating fortnights or alternating weeks will be me speaking for say 10-15 minutes from my idea. I found that that's what I like. Now, in terms of that as well, I waited for the podcast by building the community. Ask the community. So stories is a great example. Once you get used to stories, you can do questions, you can get polls and stuff. My community said that like 90% of them wanted to hear what my thoughts were for a 15-minute segment. And pretty sure it was like 80% wanted fortnightly for the interviews because of, and then people would send through feedback. So that was how I came up with that determination. So use the feedback of community because they're your target audience. There's no right or wrong, which is a really hard answer to give for someone that's wanting specifics. But I found 45-minute blocks every fortnight is great for podcasting. I do have a backlog of interviews being put up. And so one of the other ones would be planning. If you kind of do it ad hoc, you're probably going to miss some of them. And then people like consistency, especially guys. So have your planning a 3, 6 month, 12-month plan, and then try and get as strategic as you possibly can where, okay, it's going to be mental health week. So I'll then put on Carl from Bloke psychology. It's going to be, something to do with fatherhood. So then I'll get someone to talk about fatherhood. So, Mother's Day, you might get a female from your community to talk about it. So trying to be strategic and link it all in so it all makes sense.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. We might come back to you later. We will. I'll move on to Omar De Silva, who is the founder of For Men Australia, a non-profit organisation which is focused on supporting men to develop their mental health and well-being. And Omar runs numerous workshops and seminars throughout the year. Omar, can you tell us where you have focused your efforts in developing content in this space and some of your learnings?
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks, Kim, and hi, everybody. Thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it. We started For Men Australia a few years ago now, off the back of personal experience and sort of getting together with a bunch of people to figure out where can we have the biggest impact on the mental health crisis here in Australia. And where we decided that we thought we could make the biggest impact was by taking an entirely proactive approach to the mental health and wellbeing space. And so our whole thesis is if we can support men in recognizing that mental health and wellbeing is an enabler of achieving meaningful success, as opposed to something that we should feel comfortable sacrificing to pursue society's version of success, then hopefully we have less men in less dire straits. And so everything that we talk about is trying to, it's all about a positive outlook. It's all about trying to build awareness, understanding, knowledge, skills in an area or several areas that we can use to deploy to, again, proactively develop our mental health and wellbeing. And so we've built what we talk about as a self-leadership model. Obviously, plenty of people have got their own version of a self-leadership model, but for us, it's lined up on 4 pillars: personal, professional, physical, and social. So personal talks about your own sense of purpose, your own goals and ambitions, your value system, etc. Professional looks at career, finances, skill building. Physical is your sleep, your nutrition, your health, and social looks at relationships, family, friends, community. And so our approach across our entire organization is trying to develop this understanding of a holistic approach to your mental health and well-being. And then our content is built, lined up to one or more of those pillars. And then we will figure out which pillar is in focus depending on some other thing which is going on. So where we've got the self-leadership model, we've got the 4 pillars of the self-leadership model. And what we're trying to do with our organization is raise awareness of the challenges, inspire people and motivate people to want to make a change and educate them on how to do that. And so the combination of what pillar do we want to address and what is the intention of the content, is it awareness, inspiration, motivation, or education, will determine what it is that we're doing. We determine what it is we're doing and when we're doing it based on the bigger picture. So just like Sean said, is it Men's Mental Health Week? Is it Men's Mental Health Month? Is it International Men's Day? Is it some other thing? How can we line up to the bigger picture and the broader conversation going on out there in the landscape, so our content has the best cut through that it can for us to achieve the goals that we're trying to as an organization. So in summary, it's about trying to get that alignment from your purpose and your vision all the way through to what you're trying to achieve with that particular piece in the context of the bigger picture. And if you can line all of those things up, that's where we've found you get the best cut through.
And in terms of the content that you're producing, what sort of content are you producing, and what's that aligns with those pillars? Could you describe the differences and what is getting the best cut through?
Yeah, sure thing. So we run workshops with corporate organizations for a fee, which we then use the funds of to run community events and workshops, which are then run for free. We will capture content at those sessions wherever we possibly can and repurpose it. But when it comes to us creating content, if you like, organically or from scratch, we have a video-based approach. So we'll do vlogs. We will interview people based on their unique backgrounds, their unique perspectives. We go for long form. So we ask people to be available for about an hour and a half, and we sit down and we have that chat, or we do it virtually. Obviously, a number of different factors come into that. Then off the back of that, we make available the long form content, and then we chunk it up. And inevitably, what will happen is in a long form conversation, we will have multiple pillars that are addressed, and each of those pillars will be addressed in many separate parts. So one person might talk about their physical fitness routine, and they might talk a little bit about sleep. And so we'll chunk that little piece, and borrowing the term of snackable content, we'll use that snackable content and we'll put it out there just to talk about sleep. Or we'll take the slightly longer version and we'll put out the fact that they talk about sleep, and then they also talk about nutrition and the way those two things interact, for example. So you've got a slightly longer piece of content. So that's how we go about vlogs. And where we ended up with vlogs is we found it's the most versatile way to produce content. You get video, you get long form for people that are into long form and for people that are into video. And then you can chunk things up into the snackable content. You can, of course, make it just audio over image. You can just make it audio. So it's a very versatile, it gives you the biggest opportunity and it gives you the most breadth to maximize the content, which is why we went on video. That said, sometimes we will also run a community-driven content creation approach. So in October of last year, we ran a campaign where it was all about we had 5 or 6 questions, and we asked men to, actually no, more than just men, we asked people to respond to those questions as a conversation starter for mental health I think it was Mental Health Month we did it in. And then people responded to those questions. They sent us in a photo and we used that as the content driver. And the intention of that was by trying to show as many people as we could how many people are engaged in these types of conversations and in these types of thoughts, to make it easier for the next person to feel comfortable talking about it. We've got another one bubbling away in the background at the moment, which is around nominating somebody that inspires you. So this is about trying to get people to recognize other people they're inspired by, who can then pass it on, and you start to get that community generated content, which does two things: gives you great content, but then it helps deliver on your mission, right, of raising awareness or starting the conversation or whatever.
Do you have a very big team? It sounds like you've got a sophisticated production team. When you're talking about I've got to imagine a whole room full.
Sure.
Can you tell us how that looks for you?
Yeah, so we have got an active working volunteer group of 5, and we speak every Wednesday for an hour. And then in between that, we're all doing whatever we need to do to achieve what it is that we've set out to achieve. Some of us will do more than others, just based on life situations. I'm in a fortunate position. I have a couple of businesses and a larger team within them. And so I'm able to leverage some of their support at different points in time to support us in achieving those things as well. But yeah, there's certainly a bucket load to be done, and we certainly don't get it right all the time, or a lot of the time, and we certainly don't get as much done as what we would like to get. But it's certainly the results of collective efforts. And
finally, Omar, from me, which channels have you found have been most successful? Sean was talking about the 25 to 45 age group, which is definitely the sweet spot for a lot of online activity that I've seen, particularly in sport. But and we've heard before that cohort is more likely to be online. Is it Facebook? Is it Instagram? Is it Twitter? Are there any that you've just ruled out? And have you spent much on social media marketing?
Yeah, good question. So can't remember who gave me this analogy, but they were talking about it's a far more enjoyable breakfast if you have half the size of the piece of toast and put all of your jam on that half piece of toast where you've got plenty, rather than spreading it thin and not having really what you were going for. And the point being, we have selected a couple of ways that we go after what we're trying to go after to try and make it the most enjoyable experience, and not stretch ourselves too thin. Our organizational strategy is create content, environments, sessions, activities which are most closely aligned with 25 to 35. That's our age group. And then through what people will talk about as a halo effect, if you get some content which is great for the 35-year-olds, the halo effect will start to drift out and capture 36 to 40s. And then on the other side of it, the halo effect, it'll start to drift out to 21 or 20 to 24. But we focus on content for 25 to 35. That gives us the best potency, if you like, in what we're creating. And then it'll drift out and organically spread. As a result of that, the primary channel for us is Instagram, because that's the primary channel that cohort is engaging with. Huge generalization. We're talking about social media platforms, and it's obviously one thing. Facebook, as a global trend, is seeing declining engagement in the younger cohorts and increasing engagement in the older cohorts. So that's something to be aware of. YouTube is another one. We've got a very rudimentary YouTube channel, and in fact, it may as well be non-existent, not by design, by lack of resources. We think that that's a really important channel, and because we're video based, again, it sort of makes good sense. But my 2 cents on it, for whatever it's worth, is get started, whatever it is that you want to do. The easiest thing for you to do to get started on, do that. And then make the most of that as your start, and then build from there.
That's great advice. Thank you very much, Omar. We might come back to you.
Sure thing.
I'm going to turn now to Callum McPherson, who, if anyone was in the room before, he was a fire engine chasing, police chasing, news breaking, hard-hitting news reporter for Channel 7 over in South Australia. But he also had behind the scenes a growing interest and passion for men's health, which led to the creation of the podcast Young Blood Men's Health Matters, which Callum's been, regularly putting out for a couple of years now, and it's a really high quality podcast. So he's one of the earlier pioneers. I've noticed a lot more podcasts around men's health for different audiences popping up. And he's putting out at least 2 a month, I think. And Callum is now also the founder of Young Blood Media. So that's a fantastic name, Callum, and very interested to know what that incorporates. So I'll hand it over to you to tell us about your journey and what you have discovered in your experience in the space, particularly with podcasting.
Cool, thanks for that, Kim, and thanks to Sean and Omar for presenting so far. Some really great tips on content production and a lot of things that I would definitely second. So I'll try not to be too repetitive, but just really good breakdowns of stuff there. And it's good to see other people doing such awesome stuff in this realm. So yes, I am the creator of Young Blood Men's Health Matters, which is a video podcast. It's aimed at young men between the ages of 18 and 40 primarily. So that's 15 to 45 bracket, as we know, is the one where suicide's the biggest killer of young men. So that's the vague target. But I suppose, like the other guys, the majority of the guests and the content still probably falls between that 25 to 35 age, but it's certainly relevant to men who are younger, men who are older, and then also importantly, the women in all of our lives and families in general, because I think we all create content that's targeted specifically to men, but it's also relevant, interesting, and important to women and everyone else in the community as well, because if we have more effective, more engaged, more educated men who are more sure of themselves and in better health, then it's better for everyone. So the story with Young Blood is that, yes, I was a news reporter for 7 News for a number of years, and I was working a shift one day when I got the call that a friend of mine had died by suicide, and that was a big shock for me. That was very hard to stomach and sort of rocked my world, as it does for so many. And that made me realize just how many young men go through this either directly or they know someone who has, and not just young men, but everyone is pretty much impacted by suicide in some way at some point. So with my skills as a journalist, I thought, how can I use what I know and what I do to be able to make some sort of an impact and help in this regard? And what I noticed is that there's just weren't many platforms for young men to actually open up, share their stories, tell it like it is, put it out there and show each other examples of other guys that are going through whatever it might be. And the point being that you then realize that actually you're not alone, because it was such a common theme that people who end up being suicidal or who are just struggling in general tend to feel like they're the only ones who are going through what they're going through and no one else can understand it. So with that being the basic principle, we really just wanted to show everyone examples that actually know you're not the only one. There's so many others. And with that being the point, I try to cover as broad a range of topics with as broad a range of guests as possible, just so it's super inclusive, and hopefully there's an episode for everyone, because we don't just want to talk to one group of young men, we're talking about absolutely everyone. So I really try to be diverse with it. But yeah, I started doing the podcast. I do it at a professional studio with one of my old cameramen. He actually runs a business in Adelaide called Pod Booth, which is all for video podcasting, and started just getting young guys on to share their stories from all around Australia. And yeah, that's up to 55 episodes now as of yesterday. I've been doing it for about a year and a half, and was lucky or fortunate enough to win Best Silver for Best Wellbeing podcast last year, which was a bit of a thrill to know that it's being regarded at that level, which is great. But I suppose what's been better than the awards, which we don't really do it for, but are good, I guess, for our profile, has been just the feedback from so many men and the people we're trying to reach, saying that it's really helped them. It's made them feel less alone. It's made them better able to cope with their grief and their own stories, and made them feel that they can speak up and that they don't have to feel shame or feel like they have to hold whatever it is inside themselves. So that's really what we're doing it for. The old, if we can help one person, then it's worth it, and it's certainly helped a lot more than that, which has been really great. So it's been a big journey so far, that really, exactly like Sean said, there's never going to be the right time, and there's always going to be a million reasons why you shouldn't do something, but you just learn along the way and just go for it. Just put one foot in front of the other, and if you're persistent, then good things will happen, and one thing will lead to the next. And I found that to be true. And I think my success with the show is, and the other guys as well with their stuff, is totally owed to the fact that this is a cause that people truly connect with and that touches everyone's life. If we were just trying to do entertainment shows or shows about sport or something, trying to build that from the ground up, I think it would be just about impossible, because you don't get the support from people that you sort of really tug at the heartstrings of, because everyone's got their own story. So like Sean said, with building his community and listening to them and the sort of strength that they give him, I'm the same way, that this is really something that's created for our community. And every day we see how it's benefiting people and making people feel more comfortable with themselves. And I think slowly, as we have more voices added to this conversation in a way that's in your face, it starts to shift that mentality as a society, that men don't talk, because men do talk. We do want to tell our stories. We just need space to do so, and permission from each other that that's okay. And really, it's about trying to make vulnerability a sign of strength rather than a weakness. And we're trying to make opening up and being honest a cool thing for men to do for current and future generations, rather than that stoic, no emotions type deal, which is what Sean's doing with the Modern Bloke. That was a lot of rambling. You want to ask another question?
We've got a question. We've got a few fresh questions coming through from John Milhelm from Mentoring Men, who's asking you, Callum, do you think that storytelling opens the door for men to start understanding some of their own situations and the potential for progress in life? What do you think should be next?
Yeah, so that's absolutely the point. I guess this show and others is never going to fix the whole problem. It's not even a problem that necessarily can be fixed when we're talking about people's individual mental health, but it serves to plant the seed, I think, in viewers and listeners' minds when they see other people who they can relate to, because they find an episode which resonates with them and a guest who might be similar to them in a similar situation. It plants that seed in their mind that actually, there is hope, there is light at the end of the tunnel. Even if you think it couldn't possibly get any worse and you can never make it out of it, it can be done, and it has been done before, and other people have gone through what you've gone through. So I suppose by planting that seed, and then those people hearing about how others manage to take steps to pull themselves out of those dark places, which is often accepting that they need some help, reaching out to whoever that person is that cares about them, being accountable and finding a strong enough reason to change and keep on living, that then perhaps spurs them on to whatever that next step is. But we're not ever forcing anything down anyone's throats or telling them really what to do. I'm a storyteller and a facilitator, and it's all about lived experience and giving men examples for what works for other people, but we're never sort of preaching or telling people what they should do next. Obviously, there are guests who come and talk about the various clinical help that help them, or techniques that they use themselves, but it's never about preaching to people what they need to do next. It's just sort of planting that seed that things can improve. This is how other people have done it, and get those wheels turning as to how you might be able to change your situation if you're feeling a certain way.
A question for, again, all three of you, I guess, but Sean and Omar in particular, you're building a community of people around the content that you're building, that you've created, and a lot of online engagement. How is this translating into connection and engagement into real work, from just liking something and being involved with it to actually becoming involved in sort of the day-to-day men's health work that you're doing? Sean?
I was just because it's quite interesting. So I was on a podcast called Connecting Good People. So as an example, I was on a podcast called Connecting Good People down the peninsula, and one of the ladies, which is from where I'm from, one of the ladies who was listening to and knew the host of the podcast contacted me to work in around Doveton, which is a low socioeconomic area. This was a couple of months ago. From that podcast and talking my ideas, and then actually at 10 o'clock this morning, I met up with her after a couple of times. And so I'm now going to be doing a young fathers program in Doveton over the next 6 months, engaging in 15 to 25-year-old low socioeconomic fathers that are still at school. So there's an example of, that came from putting out content, going, sharing on people's podcasts, to now, running workshops with underprivileged children or underprivileged fathers. Yeah, and
from my own work with the podcast, putting that out there is something that I'm interested in and I'm engaged with, and all the people that you meet along the way. That led to me now being a facilitator for middle school boys programs about healthy relationships and positive masculinity and anger management and everything that goes on behind learning at schools. So I present those to boys in year 6, 7, 8, and 9, all around at SA at schools, and also looking at developing a program for senior schools as well with some other people and a men's health centre here in SA. So there's that sort of stuff which is going on, which is really cool. And I think just the more you put content out there and the more you engage with guests and audiences, the more opportunities you get to then go and meet people and do stuff that's more hands-on. So I suppose it all ends up connecting in the end. And I always want to keep this podcast going as the microphone and the platform for people to speak. And then whenever possible, find ways to go and deliver these messages in person as well. I do get asked to do more presenting and telling my story, and then also interviewing people live, that sort of thing too. So I guess it's like as many ways as we can to get the message through across platforms and in real life.
The only I'll sort of look at it a slightly different angle. Entirely agree with what the guys have said. If the question was also about the online interaction of one person translating into sort of in-person interaction of that same individual, sort of coming at it from that angle, what certainly we have learned is that every person will take a number of interactions, of thoughts, of considerations before they are then ready to make a decision or to put something into action. And this is just basic human behavior. That's why in marketing, when you're trying to get somebody to buy something or sell, or you're trying to sell something, you have multiple touch points. And I think that that's the powerful thing about online. As you build your community and as you build that awareness, you have that opportunity to continually engage and remind people until they've then heard enough to make whatever change it might be that they need to. So in our experience, we started off primarily running in-person events. Then COVID, we pivoted to online. We're now pivoting back to, well, actually, we're sort of doing a blend. And you certainly see a fluctuation of people that are sort of, if you like, online engaged, coming through into in-person engaged, and vice versa. It's just a matter of being persistent, so each and every person can get to that threshold that they might need to do the thing that they're hoping to, and why they're there in the first place. So, yeah, there's a mixture of how people best engage and how much it takes for them to transition from online to in person and vice versa.
So for each of you, what does success look like? Is it about people taking action to do a workshop or join a program or follow or listen to your podcast? Do you have one big goal in mind, or is it just organically growing and you're getting in there and you're doing it and not seeing what happens? But how intentional are those goals for you all?
Yeah, good question. So, I mean, some of the folks here will be familiar with Jim Collins' framework and the big, hairy, audacious goal. Certainly, our big, hairy, audacious goal is to see men's suicide rates come all the way down to zero. We know that that's a heck of a long way, and we know that we're not going to be solely responsible, but we want to make a meaningful impact into bringing that down. The metric that we are still trying to figure out how to best track, but for us, where we're talking about the proactive side of things, what we're hoping to figure out is how can we understand the entry point into mental health or mental health challenge and or mental illness support pipeline. What's the average entry point at the moment? And how is it that we can bring that entry point forward? And so what I mean by that is we are all about getting men thinking about these things before it becomes too late. And by too late, I mean that they need to have any sort of extended suffering. If men can get really good at recognizing, hang on a second, something's a bit off, I've got what I need to make a quick pivot, to make a quick change, so then they don't need to get into a place which is a more dire situation. That's what success is for us. We don't want men to become so unwell that suicide is even 10 steps down the track. You know, we're trying to take that out as a possible end game because we've got it so early in the conversation. That's what we're trying to tackle.
Yeah, so these are all preventative health strategies, and I totally agree with Omar there that it's much better and easier if you can quell the problem before it turns into a real monster. And a lot of the focus from our government in terms of funding and the way we look at suicide prevention is pumping a lot of money into the extreme end of the spectrum once it's already a massive problem, which is an important part of the picture. But I think we need more of a focus and more investment into preventative health strategies, education, obviously. How can we reach more men and educate them so that we're better at looking after ourselves, being self-aware, being able to catch ourselves when we're drifting down a negative path, do that early so that it doesn't end up being a disaster in the first place. I think that's a great ultimate goal to have. For me, goals-wise, is just to reach as many people as possible and to try to be part of a positive cultural shift towards vulnerability, or at least openness being seen as a strength, and men opening up about their mental health and not being afraid to talk about how they're really going, being seen as a positive and a cool thing, and to contribute a preventative mental health strategy that helps less men get into that situation that Omar's talking about and be more able to recognize these things as they go, so that we don't end up with as big of a problem on the other end.
And Sean?
With myself being that this is predominantly at the moment a side project of mine, engagement for me is the biggest probably check of mine. Your growth in followers, your engagement on posts, how many people are active in the community, in the chat function or stories and stuff, how many people have listened to the podcast, which can be a superficial target if you then have a solid business that you're funneling to, which currently I don't. I'm looking at building that over the next 6 months whilst on paternity leave, to get into kind of, where say the Callum space, or go into this industry more full time. What I would suggest, probably combining the last question and this question, my background, similar to Omar, is business and marketing. So for people that their specialty is in, say, men's services, and thinking, okay, well, where's the value in content creation? Because if I'm here to support men as a psychologist or as mentoring men, dad's in the stress, I'm a service for that. Have a look at probably the percentage of your followers and engagement versus how many are contacting you directly, and try and get a sense check of whether it's even just asking them to be honest, where did you find out, hear about us? Because if you're looking to do content creation to funnel into your business or build your network, that percentage is going to be what you want to get as big as possible, because ultimately, you need to run a service. But just be aware, probably, and Callum, you were saying you had done it for years, and then doing podcasting was something using a skill set of yours. Probably the biggest frustration that I could imagine for someone getting into content creation, to get their service out there, is it'll take longer than you expected. It'll take more, as Callum's laughing, it'll take more time than you expected. But the value is in, it's a small percentage conversion rate generally, but the value is then in, it's an exponential growth. So you'll find that it'll start off small, and you'll probably think, what's the point? I'm not getting any phone calls, not getting this, I'm not getting anyone on my Facebook website or going to my website or signing up to my EDM or anything like that. Unfortunately, it is going to take a while, but the larger you can create that community by engaging them, supporting them, bringing them in, talking to them about who you are, what you do, using Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, or podcasting, then the more you're then going to funnel them down to your business. And that would be my kind of check, to see what's been successful. And the same as learning about podcasting. If you've got a community, the biggest value you've got is the people. So ask them questions. Ask them, even if there's evangelists or that are regularly engaging you, ask them why. Ask them what content they like. Look at your analytics as to what content gets the most engagement, and then do more of that, which will then hopefully grow your community by using that content, which will then funnel into whatever your business you're doing.
Yeah. And I did laugh there, Sean, about, how quickly you're going to feel like you're making an impact and stuff. And it could be really disheartening, definitely, if you just focus on that. If you're a content creator, you're putting stuff out there because you want people to see it and engage with it, and that's not happening, then it's easy to take that to heart and sort of be hurt by that and maybe not want to keep going. And it is important to be increasing those numbers and making sure you're getting the engagement. But I guess, Rome definitely wasn't built in a day. And it's also why you're getting into it in the first place. I would say if it's not like a deep, intrinsic, burning motivation that for whatever reason you've just locked onto this thing because it means so much to you and it means a lot to other people, then don't even try, because it's not going to be, if you're just doing it by yourself, because the amount of work that's involved is just shocking. And it's not a bad thing, because if you absolutely love doing it and you believe in it, and lots of people get something out of it eventually, then it's worth doing. But yeah, you're talking about massive amounts of hours to get a project off the ground by yourself and sustain it. So that it can't be because you want to make some money off it, or because, you just want to maybe see if you can do it, or anything like that. It's got to be like, I really, really care about doing this, and I'll just do everything that I can to make it happen. And then it's important to look at the numbers, I suppose, but it's also important to just, in a bloody-minded way, just keep going. Initially, in the first however many episodes you make or how many posts you make, you want the engagement to look like it's going up progressively, and that can be small, it doesn't matter. But don't get too wrapped up in that. Just believe in your content, believe in what you're producing, make sure what you're producing is good, and then make sure you're trying to spread it as far and wide as possible, and then understand that things just take time. And the difference between I guess thinking you're passionate and truly being passionate enough to make this stuff work is, can you stick at it and can you keep going when you're up till midnight editing and your numbers aren't going up, and you're 12 episodes in now and you're still not sure if anyone likes it or if it's worth anything, and the initial burst of motivation is well and truly gone. Do you believe in it enough to be able to keep persisting at that point? And that's sort of something that you'll find out if you try to do something like this. But I think what keeps us going is hearing from people who message us and send us a private message, or even come up and talk to us and say, hey, I listened to this episode and I related to that situation because of my brother, and it almost brought me to tears and it really helped me get through that week. And you just go, all right, it's worth it.
Yeah, that's fantastic advice. I would totally endorse what you said there, Callum. It is very time consuming, and what I've seen in a lot of people dip in and then it falls away after that initial burst of enthusiasm. So you really have to look at the why and why you're doing it, and then just keep going. Maybe following, I heard Jerry Seinfeld talking on a podcast recently with Tim Ferriss, and he had some wonderful advice just about writing, and to have a consistent time every day where if you want to be a writer, you just write 30 minutes or an hour, whatever it is, doesn't matter what it is. And I think it's the same. You have to have a consistent schedule and be putting stuff out there and not get too hooked up on the figures, because a lot of people have big figures, but they're putting a lot of money behind boosting their content. And we don't have too much time, but a lot of you have been working from a voluntary basis, and just you're not getting paid for this. So how are you? It's not your day job, or it is your day job, and how long do you think you can keep going without that sort of financial support?
No, please donate now. The link is in the description. Yeah, so I think in order to keep doing these creative pursuits, Sean will definitely agree with his podcast stuff. We just want to do the interviews and put the show together and just do that. And we'd love someone to take care of everything else. And we'd also like to get paid for it. Thank you very much. That would be excellent. But that's not how it works at all, certainly to start with and for quite a long time. So it has to inevitably turn into a business just to be able to keep it going practically. So I've become Young Blood Media. After I left my news job, I started my own media business, which does the podcast is part of it. I'm never really going to make money out of it, I don't expect, but I need enough money to make it sustainable through sponsorships, and ideally grants would be great. And I also do short film making, presenting, media consulting, and I work here part-time at my actual job. So I'd love to one day be able to just work for myself and just work in the men's health space and education space in all these different ways. But it's sort of a bit of a mismatch, and it's never comfortable. There's never easy money flowing in to keep the podcast going, because it is video production and it is at a professional studio, and it does require a lot of editing. There are quite high costs involved with it, and that means that I have to go and try and get money from corporate sponsors who believe in the cause, or find philanthropists, or submit to some sort of grant. And I'm always under pressure basically to find out where the next money is going to come from to keep going. But that just keeps it exciting.
I'll just touch on that because I've just learned about, so government grants and corporate sponsorship, because at the moment, I have none of that. Mine's funneled through my day job of selling alcohol, which is, just kind of putting that there. However, I guess before I pass over to Omar, because he's probably better on that, part of my branding and I guess what I wanted from the Modern Bloke as well is to change the culture and have those discussions as to why this is important. Callum hit it on the head. This isn't just important to guys' health, mental health, suicide. It's far-reaching. All mine go down the funnel of preventing violence against each other, violence against women, and violence against ourselves, being suicide. But the overarching thing is it's going to improve society. So part of mine is to just try to constantly get through to businesses, to government sponsors, to anyone that, and make it appealing for instance, the budget. So the budget that was out yesterday, to get to a point where everyone's rooting for the government to say, it's positive to support men's services, and for companies to go, I want to be seen to do something, so I'm going to sponsor that. At the moment, I don't think it's at that space. So that's part of my journey, is to make it admirable.
And it would be absolutely unbelievable if state and federal governments would open up funding for little people like us doing with these preventative health strategies, raising awareness in these sorts of ways, because they might give out funding, but a lot of it goes towards that crisis and, hundreds of millions of dollars to the big organizations. But for guys like us, we're not really able to get into government or even apply for most grants. I have just applied for one grant, but the vast majority you can't even apply for because you don't have DGR status. Like, I'm technically a sole trader, and a lot of the grants you have to be a non-for-profit, so you can't even apply for those, let alone having the government, handing anything out. So it would be awesome if that would change, but I don't like my chances of making that happen.
Sorry, Kim, I didn't mean to talk over you.
That's okay. You have the final word.
Oh, okay. I'll be quick. So in our instance, I seeded the organisation to get started. It was a cause, obviously, that I'm deeply interested in, and so I was happy to seed us getting started. And I suppose my view on the world is that in order for us collectively as a society to have the sustainable impact that we're trying to, we need to not rely on donor dollars or grant dollars or government dollars. And I say that because we're therefore not in control of the work that we're able to do. It's not to say that we don't leverage it and utilize it as much as we possibly can, but I would argue that we shouldn't rely on it. So with that in mind, when we started off our organization, which we then did get DGR status for, we set out to create an organization which could demonstrably create value for organizations, so we could then charge them a fee for services which we would deliver, which they could justify within their own corporate budgets. And that lesson came out of an education business which I had prior to setting up For Men, where we did leadership training. And in those leadership workshops, I would often talk about my own mental health and my mental health challenges and the mental illness that I dealt with, and would see the impact it would have, and so would those corporate organizations. So the way post seeding the organization, the way that we've been able to continue going is by charging organizations for these workshops, which we then use to build more awareness and build more activity to then get the next workshop, etc. We are in the process now of pulling together a business case, and by business case, I don't mean anything deeply sophisticated, but something that us as a board and a working group of volunteers can look at to justify further investment into the organization, to hire a general manager type whose sole responsibility will be maintaining the consistency of activity and building out the network, so we get more chances to run paid workshops, so that flywheel of activity can continue. But as both Sean and Callum have said, you certainly can't get into this for the money, obviously. And just looping back to a question that John has asked in the chat around, so the question around time and people being time poor. If individuals can find meaning and energy out of the work that they do in this space, then the time that is directed to things like hobbies can be redirected to things like this, because it is equally as rewarding and energizing and give back as what those other activities would be. And so if we can help people have those conversations around what actually matters, what drives you, what helps you feel fulfilled and good and content, and it can be towards creating social impact, then happy days all around.
Okay, great. I'm sorry we have to wrap up. We could go on all afternoon, I'm sure. It's been a fantastic chat with you this lunchtime, even though we've missed our lunch. We're very satiated by what you've said. So look forward to seeing what else is next for you guys. And as a big podcaster listener, you won't be putting me to sleep, but I'll be listening to you on my car travels and elsewhere. So thanks everybody, and stay tuned for the next session.
Great, thanks Kim. Go and get yourself ready for the next session. Go and have a break. Thanks to all speakers. That was awesome. Thanks for everyone who stuck around over the lunchtime and enjoyed that talk. That's superb. For those who missed it, we'll make sure it's available on video sometime in the next couple of weeks.